Hello everyone, my name is Nthabiseng Mashiane and I'm super excited to be chatting with you today. The topic that I'm going to be speaking on is how we can effectively onboard and integrate new developers into teams. I'm super excited to give this talk today, and before I start, I'd just like to give a shout out to the DevConf team. Thank you so much for organizing this event and making sure that it goes on and it's not postponed, even despite the pandemic that we are in right now. So this is my first conference talk. I'm super excited to be giving it, and it's my first virtual conference as well, so exciting stuff. So into the talk. Before I start my talk, I would just like to give you some stats around onboarding, just so that you get a sense of what onboarding looks like across organizations. So research shows that 88% of employees rate the onboarding process as being poor. New hires are 8 times more likely to be disengaged within the first 3 months of joining their company after having had a bad onboarding experience. 28% of new joiners leave within the first year. So new joiners don't even spend more than a year after having had a bad onboarding experience. And 22% of companies don't even have a formal onboarding process. So they kind of just let you in and wing it along the way and hope that somehow you get comfortable and you get accustomed to how the team and the company operates, which is not really good, right? And the last stat is that 20% of new hires are unlikely to recommend the employer after being onboarded. So before I introduce myself again, from the stats that we've seen, we can tell that there's a gap in the onboarding process, and that there are opportunities to improve the process, opportunities for growth. And also we can see that bad onboarding processes have adverse effects on the company. So they lose productivity, employees become disengaged, and people are likely to leave, which is time and money lost. So a broader introduction of who I am. As I said, my name is Nthabiseng Mashiane, and I work in the financial sector in one of the banks. I've been working now for just over 2 years, and I'm in the payment space where we process high-value payments. On a daily, this is the stack that we use. We use Java predominantly, and we use the Spring Boot framework. We use Angular for our front end, OpenShift, Docker for deployments, and Jenkins for the build pipeline and build automations. So at work, I do a little bit of Angular as well, but I'm mostly comfortable with Java and doing backend stuff. Besides that, I am a volunteer author for an online magazine called iCode, where we write technical articles on different topics within the tech space. So if you're looking for a space to read up on some different technologies during this lockdown, I highly recommend that you check iCode. I also volunteer at an NGO. It's called Diva Initiative, and what we do there is that we teach young girls how to code. We introduce them to coding at a very young age in an attempt to bridge the gender gap that exists within the tech space. And I also have a blog on Medium where I write a couple of articles. It's been pretty dry, but I think because of the lockdown, I'll get more time to write more articles. So what exactly is onboarding? According to the Society of Human Resource Management, onboarding is a process of helping new hires adjust to social and performance aspects of their job as quickly and as easily as possible. So onboarding is made up of a lot of steps, but for the purposes of this talk, I divided it into 3 parts, and I think these are the main 3 parts that we should really think about when creating our onboarding processes and also when onboarding a new joiner. So the first thing is that you have your organizational and cultural onboarding, and that speaks to the paperwork and the admin that's involved when a new joiner comes in. So them filling out information about the package, them filling out information about their next of kin, the retirement annuities, and so forth. And also it's where they will get to meet executives and understand the company structure, get a tour of the company and see the different buildings depending on how big or small the organization is. And in this part of onboarding, what usually happens is that it's done in groups, and all the new hires would come together and they will be exposed to all of these things. They would get an understanding of the culture, the dress code, the mission, the values, the strategy of the organization, and they'll also get a chance to network with the execs for that time. The second part of onboarding is the team onboarding. And this is where the new joiner finally gets to meet the team. They get to see who the team members are. They get to see what the team culture is like. They get to understand what the team does, get an overview of the projects that they're working on, and also get allocated their desk space and really start interacting with the team and getting to know each other. The third part is the technical onboarding. And technical onboarding speaks to you getting the hardware and the software that you will need to perform your daily tasks. So here you would get access to any systems that you would be working on from a project perspective. So if you're working on a project X and there are certain repos that you need to have access to, certain queues or certain interfaces and the likes, then this is where they will make sure that you have all of these things ready so that you can start being productive in the team. And in terms of hardware, that's where you get your dev kit. So your screen, your laptop, your any extensions that you would need or peripherals that you would need to be able to work, right? And with this, some of the things that you really need to think about is make sure that you don't overwhelm your new joiner with too much information, especially when it comes to your team onboarding. Sometimes you find that new joiners come into the organization and they are given so much information that it ends up not having any value to them because they forget the things that they were told because it's just so much. So rather try spread it out over a couple of weeks, even months, depending on how big your team is and how many projects you have. And another thing also from the organizational and cultural onboarding perspective is that make sure not to give people too many forms to fill out, because a lot of times you find that you just have so many forms to fill out, but then when you were applying, some of the information you definitely know that you had filled out already. So try implement things like your DocuSign just to make the new joiner's job much easier to sign and submit documents. And it's also green, so we're saving the planet as well. And also one question you can ask yourself in terms of the paperwork that the new joiner needs to fill out is that, what am I going to be using this information for? Is it necessary for me to be collecting this information? What business value does it add? or what part of the organization's regulation does this information fulfill? Because I think sometimes organizations don't review their paperwork or their processes often, and that causes us to keep on collecting certain information or doing things in a certain way that's not really beneficial to the organization. So it's good to take a step back and look at your processes and say, we've been doing things like this for 5 years, and is it still applicable in the time that we're in now? Should we be maybe changing how we do things to accommodate new people? And with that being said, it brings me to the next slide, where there was a paper where they, actually I think it was a blog post, where they spoke about things that people don't like during onboarding. And the first point was the point of having too much admin and paperwork. And this, like I said, sometimes you have the information already in the system. So just implement maybe an autofill if it so happens that your systems are quite decentralized and you can't grab information from one point. Try to implement that so that you can have sharing of information across different systems, and it will make it easier in that people can just have a small portion of the form to fill out, as opposed to filling out the entire form over and over again for different systems. The second part was the information overload. So when the new joiner gets there, they will be feeling anxious, nervous, and also everything is new, so they're really bombarded with a lot of new stuff at the same time. So try not to add on to that bombardment with a lot of information that you could have spread out over a week, because the new joiner is there and they're going to be there for a while, so why not spread it out? They're not going anywhere, but we hope that after having a good onboarding process, they won't go anywhere. And the last thing that people didn't like about onboarding was the isolation after day one. So usually the organization and cultural onboarding could happen on one day, and then the team and technical onboarding happens on the other day. So because the organization and cultural onboarding happens with other new hires as a group, people often build rapport, and they feel like they're part of a group because everybody's new, so you don't feel very isolated when you're there. But then when you come to the team, you're probably going to be the only new person, so maybe sorry, I lost my train of thought. So because of that isolation, when a person comes to the team, make sure that you introduce them and you let the team know that somebody new is coming, so that people can walk up to them, they can offer them coffee, and they can ask how they're doing, what they need, if they're settled. And I think that will ease those feelings of feeling isolated, because everybody is there with you, they've welcomed you, they've introduced themselves, and you're building some form of rapport. So why put an effort into onboarding? Studies show that a good onboarding process or onboarding experience improves customer retention, customer engagement, productivity, and overall satisfaction. Studies also show that 69% of employees are likely to stay with an organization for much longer after having experienced a good onboarding process. And also there have been reports of 50% increased productivity after employees have been onboarded correctly. And I think in general, onboarding fosters a sense of belonging within the space that you're in. And so when you feel like you belong, you're more likely to be more productive, more engaged, and you're more likely to put your best foot forward in everything that you do. So a little bit about my experience. I joined the organization that I work for through a graduate program that was 18 months long. And within the 18 months, we would have three rotations where you would spend 6 months at a space, and then after 6 months rotate to another space, and then rotate to another space. But in instances where you felt like you wanted to explore another space, you could still opt to rotate out of that space. So because of that, I had 4 rotations, and that exposed me to different ways of being onboarded and integrated into teams. And it helped me see how different kinds of onboarding affected my productivity, my engagement, how I showed up, and my likelihood of staying with the team after the rotations had been done. Because after you've completed your rotations over the 18 months, you had to pick a space where you felt like you wanted to be permanently placed. So that also played a role into which space I picked to stay. And in this section, actually, I'm going to be speaking about some of the observations that I made with regards to how different onboarding processes affected me and what I think really worked in helping integrate me into the team and really make me feel like I belong to the team. So number 1 is to introduce the new member. This sounds very trivial, but you'd be surprised at how many times some people aren't formally introduced to their team members and they're just sitting there awkwardly not knowing anyone. So this helps because it avoids that feeling of isolation after having done your organizational and cultural onboarding. So what you should do, just let people know that there's somebody who's going to be coming on Monday, and that people should try and introduce themselves to this person to make it easier for the person to open up and start chatting with other people and getting acquainted. Because not everybody has that personality where they can walk up to people and introduce themselves. And for new hires, it's particularly quite daunting because it's your first job. I mean, new hires, first-time devs who've never ever worked anywhere else. But this can also apply to people who've had some previous experience. But it gets daunting and you're nervous, you're anxious, and you really just want to prove yourself, not only to yourself, but to the team and your manager as well, to say that you didn't make a bad decision at choosing me. So in some of these things that I'm going to speak about are ways that you can help the new joiner get settled and calm down and be able to be productive and contribute to the team in an efficient way. So with regards to this point, when I joined one of the teams in my graduate program, the team lead distributed my CV across the entire team, and they also let people know that hey, we're expecting a new grad, her name is this is her CV, and please make her feel welcome. And I really did feel welcome. When I got there, people walked up to me and introduced themselves to me. And I think in terms of conversations, because they had seen my CV, we had things that we could speak about, and they kind of had an idea of who I was, what I like, and what my capabilities are. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should distribute new joiners CVs. You can just send an email, make an announcement during stand-up, or send a text on Slack or on WhatsApp to let people know that, hey, there's somebody coming, and please do introduce them and make them feel welcome. The second point is the workstation and dev tools setup. There's nothing quite more disappointing as you coming into the organization and not having your laptop, not having a place to sit, and you come in and you walk in alone, and then they tell you that, okay, you can sit here, but they don't tell you where exactly. And then you sit somewhere, and it turns out that it's someone else's seat, and then they come and you have to move, and then it's just a small thing. It's a little thing, but just give a person disk space, allocate disk space to a person. And if you have hot disks, you can say that, okay, maybe for this week or this month, this is where you'll be sitting, but just know that we have a culture of hot disk. And that allows the new joiner to suss out the vibe and see how things work, and see if any other people have their own allocated spaces. Because even if you have hot disks, you might find that some people actually don't like using hot disks, and they just have a dedicated seat where they sit and they've set up. So try do that, and also have the laptop ready, because it's not like the new joiner just sprung up on you unannounced. You knew that on the 25th, on a Tuesday, Thabo is going to come into the office. They knew. So by the 25th, on that Tuesday, make sure that in the morning you have the laptop, you have the cables, the headsets, the phone, the screen, desk and chair ready. And it makes you feel like people actually want you there, because when you're there and now people are scurrying to get things that you would need to work, it makes it feel like they were unprepared for you, and that's just not a nice feeling. And also, you're just gonna sit there, or you're gonna go and annoy some other dev who's trying to fix some bug that's been giving them the problem for the past 3 days, and they're tired of reporting on that bug in stand-up. So try to avoid that and just have the workstation and dev tools set up. And also another thing, the dev tools includes the software that they will need. So if there are licenses for tools that they will need when installing and setting up the workstation, give them that as well. Send in an email if it's a list of all the links and whatnot. Give them access to all the repos that they will need, and just to make it a seamless thing where they can start playing around with the technologies, looking at the repos, running code, and seeing what exactly is happening in the team. The next point is to scope your projects accordingly. And by this I mean, don't give projects that are too big or too small, projects that are too complex or too easy. You need to find a balance, and it can be quite tricky. And what I find to work best is that you have to speak to your new joiner. Get to know what your new joiner knows, how proficient they are in certain technologies, and then after that, give them a task within the team that kind of suits or matches their level of proficiency and also what they're interested in. So you need to make sure that it's not too complex. And at the end, towards the end of my talk, I will also be talking about my survey results. I ran a survey where I was asking devs what their experience regarding onboarding was, and they make some good points there. And I think we will definitely visit some of the points or observations that I've made in this section at the end. Observation number 4 is to give meaningful work. So sometimes managers find that it's easy to give a new joiner a project that's not necessarily valuable to the team, but a small project that can keep them busy while maybe they're working on other stuff, the core project, or they're chasing deadlines. I can understand why managers would want to do that, because that helps in that the new joiner can really take their time into understanding the technology and getting a feel of the vibe. But it's not always good because that can sometimes be isolated, and the new joiner can feel very isolated with what they're doing. In my experience, when I joined my team, they gave me a project. I didn't know at the time that it was actually an important project that they've been trying to implement for a while, but not being able to finish it. So I worked at it and nobody was talking about it. In stand up, I was the only one. It was an Elasticsearch project. And I was the only one talking about the project all the time. And there was no analyst dedicated to it. There was no tester dedicated to it. And it was just me, and I was just doing everything. And so, in as much as I was excited to start the project, over time, it kind of got boring, and it felt like they don't trust me, and they just gave me a project just to keep me busy. But it turned out that at the end, it was one of the key projects that people in country have been asking for. And luckily I managed to complete it, but still to give a new joiner a project that's not necessarily valuable to the team, but a small project that can keep them busy while maybe they're working on other stuff, the core project, or they're chasing deadlines. I can understand why managers would want to do that, because that helps in that the new joiner can really take their time into understanding the technology and getting a feel of the vibe. But it's not always good because that can sometimes be isolated, and the new joiner can feel very isolated with what they're doing. In my experience, when I joined my team, they gave me a project. I didn't know at the time that it was actually an important project that they've been trying to implement for a while, but not being able to finish it. So I worked at it and nobody was talking about it. In stand up, I was the only one. It was an Elasticsearch project. And I was the only one talking about the project all the time. And there was no analyst dedicated to it. There was no tester dedicated to it. And it was just me, and I was just doing everything. And so, in as much as I was excited to start the project, over time, it kind of got boring, and it felt like they don't trust me, and they just gave me a project just to keep me busy. But it turned out that at the end, it was one of the key projects that people in country have been asking for. And luckily I managed to complete it, but still the fact that I didn't feel as though it was scoped properly and that it was an important project or a project that adds value to the team, I didn't really want to do it eventually, and I just got bored. So try to give people meaningful work and make sure that it's something that where they feel like they're adding value. A tip that I would give around this is to start off the new joiner, instead of giving them an isolated project at the beginning, maybe give them a task that's part of the backlog, or create a small task in the backlog and assign it to them. And make sure that it's a small task. So for instance, let's say they have to do a front-end task where they disable a button at some point for the front end. And so what you can do there is that give them that task. It's a very small change, but make sure that they complete it and deploy it to either dev or SIT. And what that does is that it allows the new joiner to really see the workflow or the end-to-end process of you writing code on your local machine, pushing it to Bitbucket or Git, and then having it unit tested if they have to write unit tests, they're having the PRs reviewed and approved, and having the build start and the deployment and the monitoring thereafter. It really gives them a sense of what the stack is very quickly in the process. And also, if they are unfamiliar with some of the technologies, it also gives them something specific to learn. So if you're using the Jenkins build pipeline, for example, and they've never used Jenkins, they can go to the internet and search relevant information around Jenkins, because they have seen that, oh, okay, there's this thing, it does this. And also they go in to that research having a slight idea of how, of what exactly they should search, and a little bit of how the tool works, which is a good thing. So that's something that I think people can implement. Team leads, teams, managers, they can implement when a new joiner comes in, just to get the new joiner up and running. And also it tests that you have access to all the systems and everything is set up correctly. The fifth observation is to set clear expectations. And what I mean is that as a dev, you do know that you're going to be writing software, right? But sometimes you don't have the overall picture of why you're writing that software, who you're writing it for, and what the aim is, basically. And the other thing is that from an expectation perspective, the new joiner knows that they have to write code, but because different teams have different standards, I think it's also important to say that, okay, these are our standards, and when you write code, we expect you to write unit tests for all of your code. We expect you to comment your code, for example, or we expect you to have a README in your code all the time, and things like that, just so that they have some frame of reference to check if they're actually doing the right thing, because anybody can write code, but just the code adhere to your standards is a clean code and doesn't make sense. So I think with setting clear expectations, you need to really say upfront if you have standards, or if there is an expectation, even if they're junior. I think there are expectations for juniors to also perform at a certain level. So put it out there, and that helps the new joiner work having the end in mind and understanding that they have to produce a certain type of work, or they have to show up this way, or complete tasks this way, or participate in a certain way. The other observation is to give regular feedback. So as I said earlier, new joiners, particularly first-time devs, they often have anxiety and they're nervous, and they always wonder, am I doing the right thing? Am I moving in the right direction? Am I adding any value? So giving regular feedback can really help the new joiner feel that, okay, I'm making progress, or make them work towards getting to a point where their manager deems that point to be the right level for them. So when given regular feedback, also make sure that it is very detailed. So if you like something, you could say that I would like to commend you on how you write your pull request comments. They're very detailed, they're very clear. You specify what exactly you've changed, and we really appreciate that. Not many people do that. Or if they don't write PRs correctly, be like, one of my concerns is how you create your pull requests. Most of the time the comments are unclear as to what you have done, and it makes it harder for us to review our pull requests. What you can do is that to use this framework, when you write your pull requests, or you can refer them to somebody in the team and say, speak to some of the devs and see how they write their pull requests and try from there. So when giving very specific feedback, the new joiner knows what exactly to look out for, and they're always mindful, and they will always reflect to check if they are doing what you have suggested that they do, and it really helps in the new joiner's growth. The last point is having a growth plan, and with a growth plan, you kind of show the new joiner that you care about their growth and you really want to see them advancing in their career. And it also helps the new joiner to work having a certain frame of mind. So if, for instance, you sit with your manager and you talk about your growth plan and you set your objectives for the year, when you go back to your desk and work, when you do certain tasks, you'll always revert back to the objectives that you set for yourself to see that if what you're doing is pushing you towards achieving those objectives. And also, it's just always good to start with the end in mind. And it just shows that, okay, the people here actually want to see me grow and they're willing to help me grow, which is always a good thing. So the onus is not on managers and team leads only. The points that I've said mostly relate to team leads. I think those are the things that team leads have to think about when they have a new joiner. But it's not on the manager only. Of course, the manager has to make the first steps and efforts into making sure that the new joiner is comfortable, but it's not only their job. New joiners also have to play a role in accelerating their growth and making sure that they're comfortable within the space that they're in. And these are some of the tips. I think there are very few tips, but I think it's something that new joiners can think about and try to incorporate in the way that they show up at work and how they engage with employees and approach projects. So number one is to take ownership of your project. And I mean full ownership. In the Agile way of working, one of the things that Agile pushes is that you should own your project entirely. One mistake that I made with the Elasticsearch project that I worked on was that I didn't take full ownership of it, and I expected everything to be handed over to me so that I can do. And I mean, I would ask questions, but I think it wasn't at that level where you feel like you own something and you're really pushing a project for yourself. So I think that new joiners should definitely take ownership of their projects because it'll allow them to look at blockers and obstacles with a different lens, in that when you don't have enough information about a project, you are motivated to go out and look for that information or raise it and speak to someone to make sure that you have that information, because it's your project and you really want to finish it. So when you're given a project, even if it's a big project or a small project, really try to make it your own and make sure that you fully understand the requirements and you see it to finish as well. Number two is to volunteer. So here what I mean is that you should always raise up your hand to say, hey, can I help you? Or I can help you with this. And it's not necessarily supposed to be for dev tasks only, but anything pertaining to the team. Even if it's work outside of what you do, if you have the capacity, do raise your hand to go help, because that not only exposes you to other parts of the team, but you get to build rapport and network with other people that maybe you wouldn't have given your role. So do volunteer, raise your hand up if you have extra time. And also when people give their updates in stand-up, if you have time and you've completed your task, walk up to them and be like, hey, I heard you talking about this task. I'm really interested in it. Can I see what you're doing? Can we do a pair programming? Or can you give me a small task there for me to implement? And that will help you learn the system much quicker. And you'll also build rapport again, and you'll be more comfortable with the stack that you're using in the team. The other thing is to ask lots of questions. Everybody knows that you're new, and it's okay. Like, it's okay for you not to know. So there's no need to put yourself under pressure or pretend like you understand things when you actually don't. So just speak up, ask questions if you don't understand, and I assure you, people are there to help you adjust and learn, and people do understand, especially if you are a first-time dev. They do understand that, okay, they just came into the workspace, and deving in school versus deving at work is different, and people know that. So don't put yourself under a lot of strain and pressure to be someone who understands everything. It's going to take time. Generally, to get accustomed to things takes time, and that's okay. And the last tip is to relax and just have fun. You already made it to the organization. Don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to try to prove yourself, but do put in the effort, because people always appreciate effort. So relax, don't put too much pressure on yourself, but at the same time, do deliver, do put in the work, and most importantly, have fun, get to know people, get to know the stack, and yeah, just enjoy the experience. So this is the part that I spoke about earlier. I ran a survey where I approached devs to ask them about their experience with onboarding and team integration, and they raised a couple of interesting points. And in this section, I don't go over all of the points that they raised. I just picked a few questions and points that I found to be interesting. But if you want to see the entire results, please do send me an email or drop me a DM on Twitter, social media, LinkedIn, Nthabiseng Mashiane, and I will gladly share the survey results with you. So I asked people to get a sense of, is it mostly juniors or seniors? And in this survey, it's mostly juniors to intermediate devs. They're the ones who participated in the survey mostly. And these are some of the things that they highlighted as being the most important things for new joiners. So introduction to the team, which I spoke about earlier. You want to be formally introduced. You don't want to be there and sit there awkwardly, not knowing anyone. Another point is that they want an overview of the projects in the team. So I think this speaks to how people often feel isolated, or they feel like they're working in a silo, or they just haven't wrapped their head around the team. So you find that there's so many projects and they'd like to know about them, but because they don't understand how the team works, it's kind of hard to see where they fit into the bigger scheme of things. The other thing that people highlighted as being important is understanding what the team does and how they contribute to the entire organizations. So if you think back to the three parts of onboarding, there's organization and cultural onboarding, team onboarding, and technical onboarding. So people actually want to know how they contribute to the bigger organizational strategy in their team and what value their team is adding to the entire organization. So I think people generally want to understand the workings of the organization, which is also the fifth point here I mentioned. They want to understand how the organization works and how everything fits in together, and get that overview and place themselves in some part of that bigger picture. And the last point is the work environment setup. Just to add to this, when I spoke to some of my colleagues and some graduates from other organizations, they mentioned that, for instance, in the internship or when they just joined, they struggled having admin access and access to systems for over a month. And that meant that some tasks they couldn't complete themselves. And that kind of sucked, because you're a dev and you do want to complete the task, but now you can't because you don't have access, and maybe you're struggling to get access. And so because of that, the company loses productivity and manpower as well, which is bad on both ends on both ends for the new joiner and for the organization, because there's no productive work being done at that point. So these are some of the most important things new joiners felt like the most important things people felt like are important for new joiners. And another question that I asked was whether people felt overwhelmed in the beginning, and 84% of people said yes. And this speaks to what I mentioned in the talk, to say that new joiners generally have a lot of emotions going on, and if you don't put in things in place for the new joiner to have their anxiety or nervous feelings reduced, then people will feel overwhelmed. So I think it's important to be mindful of that and be empathetic to new joiners, and make sure that you check up on them regularly and make sure that they have everything in place, especially within the first month of them joining. The other question that I asked was, how did you find the first project that you worked on? This was good because 41% of people said that they enjoyed the first project that they worked on, me included. But at the same time, I felt that it was also isolated and eventually got boring. And other people said that they found that the first project that they worked on was quite challenging and isolated and a bit of both. So it goes back to what I said about finding a balance, making sure that your project is not too easy or not too complex, so that the new joiner can finish it in a timely manner and also learn something from it. Another question was, what kind of onboarding process do you prefer? And a lot of people said that they prefer face-to-face. And personally, I think face-to-face works much better, because you can book out a session and just have a one-on-one session with your team lead. And I think this is something that should be driven by the team leads. In some instances, you find that some organizations have this thing where the last person who was onboarded will onboard the next person. That's all and well, but when you don't have a standard and very good seamless onboarding process, then you're just propagating bad onboarding onwards. And that's not good, because you find that sometimes the person who was previously onboarded doesn't have enough information about, say, some of the points that were raised in important things for new joiners, such as understanding the organization, understanding what the team does, and stuff like that. So when you don't have answers to that question at that point, then after I'm onboarded by that person who didn't have the answers, I won't have the answers. And it's just a domino effect of undesirable effect. So I think this should be definitely driven by the manager to make sure that every team member knows exactly what is going on and that they are comfortable. And it's also easy in that you can ask questions right there and then, and you can have multiple sessions where you take them through different parts of the team and the workings of the team. And the other question is relating to feedback. Earlier I said that one of the observations that I made in terms of what works best in onboarding is regular feedback. So a lot of people say that they are interested in technical skill feedback, and I think that's because we're devs. You want to know, am I writing good code? Am I adhering to the standards and things like that? But at the same time, you also want to see if you're a good fit for the organization or the team rather. And so you also want some feedback on your interpersonal skills. So I think this is what you should think about when you're giving feedback to your new joiner or having your catch-up sessions. So in conclusion, onboarding is really an important part of integrating new joiners into teams and organizations. And if it's really done well, it can have great effects. It can improve employee retention, productivity, engagement, and it can help cultivate a very productive work environment. And you need to always be empathetic towards new joiners and try to understand that they're new, they are nervous, they are anxious, they are excited as well, and try to create an environment where they can thrive as quickly as possible. So these are some of the references that I used. I got the slide templates from Slides Carnival. It's pretty cool, I liked it. And these are some of the papers that I read and the blogs that I read. And thank you so much for listening and giving me your time. I really enjoyed this, and I hope that you gained something from this talk. And yeah, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day further.